Mental clarity feels like an internal trait. It feels stable, personal, and independent of circumstance. But clarity does not exist in isolation from pressure. Financial dependence introduces pressure long before it introduces visible constraint. The mind begins adjusting in anticipation of consequences. That adjustment is subtle, and it often goes unnoticed. Obligations rarely arrive as dramatic events. They accumulate quietly through recurring commitments and ongoing expectations. Each one carries an implied cost for disruption. When income becomes necessary to maintain existing structures, thinking begins to narrow. The mind orients toward preservation before it considers possibility. Stability becomes the dominant filter. This shift does not feel like fear. It feels like responsibility. Yet responsibility under dependence quietly reduces cognitive range. Clarity requires psychological space. It requires the ability to examine options without immediate threat. Financial dependence reduces that space by attaching risk to deviation. The more obligations attached to continued income, the more expensive uncertainty becomes. Even hypothetical change begins to carry emotional weight. Exploration starts to feel reckless rather than analytical. This is where clarity declines. Not because intelligence weakens, but because the cost of certain thoughts increases. The mind begins discarding options before fully evaluating them. Dependence alters attention. It redirects focus toward maintaining existing flows. Questions about alternative positioning are filtered through potential disruption. Over time, the internal dialogue changes tone. Instead of asking what is optimal, it asks what is safe. Safety becomes the organizing principle of cognition. When safety dominates, interpretation narrows. Information that supports continuity feels rational. Information that challenges it feels destabilizing. This narrowing is gradual. There is no single moment when thinking visibly contracts. It happens through repeated micro-adjustments toward security. Financial obligations tie present comfort to ongoing compliance. That linkage conditions the mind to protect the source of stability. Protection becomes automatic. As protection becomes automatic, dissenting thoughts feel intrusive. Risk analysis becomes asymmetrical. Downsides are amplified, while upside scenarios are discounted. The individual may still appear thoughtful and measured. Externally, nothing seems impaired. Internally, however, cognitive boundaries have shifted. Dependence does not need to eliminate choice to affect thinking. It only needs to increase the perceived penalty of certain choices. Once penalties rise, imagination shrinks. Imagination requires tolerance for temporary instability. Financial dependence reduces that tolerance. The mind learns to avoid scenarios that threaten continuity. This avoidance does not register as avoidance. It registers as prudence. Yet prudence, shaped by dependence, consistently favors the known over the optimal. As commitments multiply, optionality contracts. The mind begins optimizing within a smaller perimeter. That perimeter feels normal because it expanded gradually. Mental clarity depends on contrast. It improves when multiple paths can be examined without immediate emotional charge. Dependence charges certain paths with disproportionate consequence. When consequence becomes unevenly distributed, thought patterns adjust. Neutral analysis becomes colored by preservation bias. The bias operates quietly beneath conscious reasoning. Over time, The brain internalizes these constraints. It learns which ideas are safe to explore and which are better left untouched. Intellectual curiosity becomes selectively applied. The narrowing rarely feels dramatic. It feels like maturity. It feels like understanding the stakes. Yet what is described as maturity is often conditioned caution. Conditioned caution prioritizes continuity over recalibration. The cost is reduced cognitive flexibility. Reduced flexibility does not eliminate competence. It simply limits the range of acceptable conclusions. The mind becomes efficient inside boundaries it no longer questions. Financial dependence strengthens those boundaries. The greater the reliance on uninterrupted income, the more rigid the perimeter becomes. Rigidity masquerades as discipline. As rigidity increases, clarity decreases. Clarity requires the ability to hold conflicting possibilities without immediate resolution. Dependence pressures the mind to resolve quickly in favor of stability. Quick resolution reduces discomfort. It also reduces depth. Complex trade-offs are simplified to avoid confronting destabilizing implications. The simplification becomes habitual. Options are screened before they are fully formed. The mind saves energy by avoiding thoughts that carry perceived threat. This is how obligations narrow thinking long before they restrict action. Action may remain technically available, but the mental rehearsal required to initiate it has already been constrained. Financial dependence reshapes perception of risk. It amplifies what could be lost and compresses what could be gained. The imbalance skews evaluation. When evaluation is skewed, clarity declines. Decisions are made within a reduced conceptual field. That reduction feels rational because it protects stability. Protection, however, is not the same as clarity. Protection is defensive. Clarity is expansive. As dependence increases, defensiveness becomes habitual. The mind orients towards safeguarding rather than questioning. Questioning becomes expensive. Eventually, the narrowing becomes invisible. It integrates into identity. Caution feels like wisdom, and limitation feels like realism. Yet the core mechanism remains simple. Obligations subtly narrow thinking long before they restrict action. By the time behavior appears constrained, cognition has already adapted. Want to see the hidden rules shaping money, power, and human behavior? Subscribe to Unseen Forces.